Let's be honest, none of you are surprised right now. Hey guys, Max here, taking a look at another great level in gaming, this time Bloodborne's bloody great Central Yharnam area. Taking place just after your character begins the game awakening in Iosefka's clinic, Central Yharnam serves as a playground that familiarizes you with the game's combat and core mechanics while introducing you to the city of Yharnam. One of my favorite things about Central Yharnam is that despite the twisting, turning paths of its later areas, it has a pretty linear start. There's only one way to go between the clinic and the Great Bridge, guaranteeing that you learn some very important lessons. First, it sets you against progressively larger groups of enemies in a pretty set order, allowing you to get comfortable with the game's combat and steadily learn just how much you can handle. While this is great for those who have never played Demon's Souls or Dark Souls 1 or 2, it's even beneficial to players who have experience with those other titles. Unlike those games, Bloodborne doesn't give you the benefit of strong, useful shields, so this route is an opportunity to get used to playing more aggressively. To this end, the enemies along this path drop tons of blood vials and quicksilver bullets, so you rarely have to worry that you'll run out of these critical consumables even if you're using a lot of them. This path also contains other useful items such as distracting pebbles or explosive Molotov cocktails that let you control these fights either by separating enemies from a group or just setting them on fire respectively. It also makes sure that you'll be exposed to path-opening levers and the red lanterns that signify the homes of Yharnamites you can speak to, the bright lanterns against a dark backdrop being a neat bit of signposting that can draw your attention. Even the very first enemy after the Central Yharnam lamp, who busts through a bunch of boxes to attack you, teaches you an important if subtle lesson that becomes useful in a bit that we'll get to later. This is all tremendously important because it ensures that every player starting off has roughly the same baseline experience before they can get lost in Central Yharnam's more maze-like areas. For a game as challenging as Bloodborne, it's important that all players start on roughly equal footing, previous experience in games like Dark Souls notwithstanding, and the linear path to the Great Bridge guarantees that players won't miss a truly critical lesson as a result of it being hidden in a side path or alleyway. It's also worth noting that this opening makes sure you get a nice dose of world building to establish the character of the city itself. Things like seeing the villagers burning beasts and hearing the Cleric Beast scream off in the distance as you climb the first ladder hammer home that Yharnam is the real star of the show, not you. At the same time, it's also a great example of From Software's lack of overt handholding, since a bunch of non-critical items are tucked away for investigative players to find. For example, even if you only take one of the shorter paths to open up the shortcut from the Great Bridge back to the Lantern, you can find a bunch of bloodstone shards to use for weapon upgrades. From Software even primes you to look around for these by placing a couple of items visibly out of reach along the opening path, wordlessly encouraging that you explore to find them. You don't need these to progress, but they do make you stronger and serve as a bonus for more curious or experienced players. Considering that your initial goal is simply to unravel Yharnam's mystery in your search for something called Pale Blood, I like that From Software hid a few items for you to root out. This first section shows that From Software made careful decisions to put the most important information right in your way, while still incentivizing the investigative gameplay that fans of their Souls games, Demon's Souls and the Dark Souls series, have come to love. Once you reach the bridge and the path splits, however, is when this level gets super interesting to me. With no fewer than 4 different options as to where you go next, it becomes very easy to get lost amid the twisting paths that are suddenly available to you. Not only does this make the city more believable to me, I mean, how many cities have you really been in that only have a single path through them? It also makes sense considering that your character is foreign to Yharnam. From the start of the game, you're repeatedly reminded of this, both by your ally Gilbert, as well as the rather unwelcoming villagers who are trying to cut your face off. Not being native to the city, it makes sense that your character wouldn't know his or her way around, and the same goes for you as the player. If you go in blind, you're not going to know any more about Yharnam than your character does, so getting lost puts you right in their shoes as an outsider. Because Bloodborne provides context in which your actions make sense, the gameplay and story support one another perfectly, making the experience all the more authentic to me. Additionally, these paths provide frequent opportunities for you to leverage what you've learned so far in deciding which way to go. For example, remembering the wolf beast you encountered in Iosefka's clinic, you may be initially hesitant to fight the pair of them on the bridge. Instead, wandering down the nearby staircase leads to a ledge overlooking the path you took through town earlier, where at first all you'll find are some pebbles. But remember that enemy by the lantern from before? The one who broke those boxes when he jumped out at you? If you look around here, you can see an item among the boxes, and applying what you observed before, you can bust through and find an entrance to the central Yharnam aqueduct, where the path can branch even further again. Other paths you can take might lead back to the central Yharnam lantern, down to a different part of the waterway, or to either of the area's two bosses. To say that there's a lot of game here is kind of an understatement. Oh, and before I forget, take a look at the lighting and color palette in the aqueduct. With the sky obscured, it's a whole lot darker. As I mentioned in the last episode of this series, darkness isn't an uncommon thing to fear, and in combination with the new enemies here, it led me to nope right out of the waterway the first time I reached it. At least I know what I'm getting into with the wolf beasts, right? I think this is a pretty neat use of color to differentiate these two parts of the level and potentially lead to this kind of response from the player. These various paths you can take also lead to all sorts of moments that reward observant players with special items and chance meetings with non-player characters such as the young Yharnam girl and Eileen the Crow. This ties back again to your overarching task to unravel Yharnam's mystery and establishes that players who want to delve more deeply into the world are rewarded for doing so. An experienced player could, for instance, hurry to the aqueduct before fighting the first boss, grabbing and using a Madman's Knowledge item to gain the first point of insight needed to level up earlier than they might have on their first playthrough. It's one of my favorite examples of how Bloodborne, like the Souls games before it, is an experience that scales and changes dramatically with knowledge, which I think is pretty damn cool. Speaking of branching experiences, I want to talk about something I find particularly interesting about Central Yharnam's two bosses, the Cleric Beast and Father Gascoigne. I've seen numerous pieces written about Bloodborne's progression that have referred to the Cleric Beast as the first boss you'll fight. Additionally, in a survey I ran, I found that 79% of the 571 participants, myself included, reported having fought the Cleric Beast before Father Gascoigne on their first playthrough. What makes this an interesting result is that the Cleric Beast is actually a totally optional boss. One could conceivably play through the entire game up to the very end without having fought it, but I mean, you'd have to be crazy to do that, right? Okay, so I did that. I don't want to make you take me at my word if I can show you real evidence, so what you're seeing here is a level 120 character I created to power through the game and fight the Cleric Beast at the very end. Those of you who have played Bloodborne yourselves will recognize from the color of the sky that this is the final act of the game, and in fact, right after this comically short fight, I got the final ending I needed to snag the game's Platinum Trophy. That last bit isn't relevant to the video, I'm just kinda proud of it. Anyway, with this in mind, I want to pick apart what factors in this level might be influencing so many players to fight the Cleric Beast first, despite it being an optional fight. The first and most immediately noticeable to me is the comparison between the path to the Cleric Beast and the other routes you can take from the Great Bridge. Two of the paths off the bridge, through the Dark House or down the ledge across from it, either lead back to the central Yharnam lamp or down to the waterway. Even still, you may not want to go into the pitch black house for fear of potential enemies that could sneak up on you, and dropping off the ledge could be seen as too much of a risk with no clear way back. Aside from those, the choice comes down to continuing across the bridge or braving the aqueduct, but as I mentioned before, you might find the combination of new enemies and poor visibility in the waterway to be a threat that you shouldn't go there yet. Even with the tough wolf beasts and brick troll on the bridge, you could very well decide that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, leading you to the Cleric Beast. In addition to these environmental factors, a couple of the level's narrative elements nudge you in that direction as well. Remember Gilbert, the ally I mentioned before? Just like you, he's an outsider, and you can meet him by the central Yharnam lamp in his brightly lit house, which, by the way, is a great example of how From Software makes use of lighting to wordlessly signify important places and objects. He advises you to seek out the cathedral ward across the valley, and from where you can speak to him, you can see a part of the city which you later learn is in fact the cathedral ward across a huge bridge that spans a valley. If you happen to speak to this character, that bridge could very easily become your most immediate objective. Additionally, the lower level of the dark house next to the bridge contains a note clearly stating that the cathedral ward is located across the Great Bridge, nudging you in the same direction that Gilbert does. So we have both the geography of the level as well as the narrative potentially influencing us toward the Cleric Beast, but never requiring us to fight it. To me, this begs the question, why might From Software want us to fight the Cleric Beast first? I think the answer lies in what you can learn from these two boss fights, specifically the strategies they incentivize you to use. The Cleric Beast, being a huge, resilient enemy, doesn't have any attacks that can be parried with your gun, so the primary strategy is going to revolve around dodging its attacks and taking swings at it when you see an opening. It fills the screen, and many of its attacks have such a long windup that you can dodge them long before the attack starts, so it can be much easier to dodge than Gascoigne's quick, relentless assault. To me, it's an encounter that seems purpose-built to get you accustomed to reading enemy attacks and figuring out how best to avoid them, a skill that's critical over the entirety of the game. More specifically, it can introduce you to the idea that some enemies are easier to dodge in one direction than another. You can get this a bit from the brick trolls and wolf beasts, who have these gap-closing lunge attacks that can punish poorly timed backsteps, but the Cleric Beast takes this a step further. You can see that one of its arms is smaller than the other, which can lead you to figure out that dodging to the left is much safer than to the right. Because it's possible to anticipate its moveset based on its anatomy like this, I found the Cleric Beast that much more believable, and because I was left to figure it out on my own, the discovery was more gratifying than it would have been if Bloodborne had just pointed it out to me. Additionally, the relative lack of clutter on the bridge facilitates playing around with your dodge, especially when you compare it to the cramped graveyard where you fight Gascoigne. At the same time, however, you can get comfortable with the game's dodging mechanics over the course of other encounters, so it makes sense to me that the fight isn't required in order to progress. It's certainly beneficial, and you can have an easier time in future encounters for having completed it, but there isn't much you'll learn from fighting the Cleric Beast that you can't learn via other means. Instead, From Software simply sets you up to find it by ensuring that you end up on the bridge and making the other paths carry the threat of the unknown, thereby making the path to the Cleric Beast potentially the most attractive. In contrast to the Cleric Beast fight, I can see a few reasons why From Software would want to make sure that you encounter Father Gascoigne. To start, he's the game's first required fight against another hunter, teaching you that beasts aren't the only major threat you'll face in Yharnam. Second, and more important to me, I feel that the fight against Father Gascoigne is a trial by fire in making the best use of your gun. Since he's a fellow hunter using hunter weapons, his gun can serve as a reminder that you should try to use yours. If you do, and you time your shots well, you can parry some of his more heavily telegraphed attacks, staggering him and allowing you the opportunity to perform a massively damaging visceral attack. With this in mind, I think the layout of the Tomb of Odin is worth a look, specifically the gravestones strewn about the area. They provide cover against Papa G's assault if you position yourself well, but if you don't, they make it much harder for you to dodge his attacks, which in turn can lead you to look to gun parries as an alternate means of defense. This is especially beneficial for Souls vets who need to adjust to how differently parrying works in Bloodborne compared to Demon's Souls or Dark Souls. But I think it's important to note that this strategy isn't required in order to win. You can totally succeed even if you just rely on normal attacks. As such, rather than outright telling you to use parries and viscerals, From Software just sets you up to figure it out on your own. If you do, the big damage from the visceral attack is all the confirmation you need that you're on the right track, and at least in my experience, I find this visceral feedback, pun intended as always, far more rewarding than just following a set of instructions. This is my favorite part of From Software's Souls games, and Bloodborne too. The games are designed such that they respect us to be smart enough to figure out what path or strategy works best, or at least best for us, and reward us for carefully experimenting with the tools at our disposal. Central Yharnam, chock full of secrets to discover, is a great introduction to this design philosophy, so before I conclude, I just want to call attention to a couple of details that you could miss that I think greatly enrich the experience. First, in the basement of the dark house just next to the note I mentioned earlier, an item on the ground can lure you into the gun sights of an old man in a wheelchair. What's awesome about it is that this is the very item you use to lure enemies around. And isn't it awesome that if you play around with the target lock in the Cleric Beast fight, you can discover that you can lock onto its head, allowing you to stagger it for a visceral attack after a couple of shots? Finally, if you explore a side path, you can speak to a little girl who asks you to find her mother and gives you a music box. An amazing detail you can miss is that the music box reveals Father Gascoigne to be the girl's father, and you can use it to disorient him in his boss fight. So, bringing it all together, Central Yharnam is a level that introduces you to the city of Yharnam and starts you off on a linear path just long enough to get you used to how the game works. Once it's done leading you through exactly what From Software thought you needed to experience, the path splits, allowing you to set your own pace and explore as much or as little as you want. If you do choose to explore the city, Bloodborne rewards you handsomely with items, secrets, and characters. Finally, it has a pair of boss fights that reward players who pay attention and think about how best to approach them. It's a real beast of an introduction, with boss fights that are all but certain to get your blood pumping. Anyway, thanks for watching. I doubt that this is the last you'll see from me on Bloodborne, and I hope that you'll join me again next time to take a look at another great level in gaming.
You have unlimited lives.
First to 10 stabs.
Yeah.
Oh,
So you got your meter there at the bottom.
oh. Oh God!
Oh, God,
my
okay,
God.
the floor is broken, guys. and there appears to be
I think you might lose points. from
some
touching
sort of lava down there.
Oh.
Well, you can't lose what you don't have, Jeremy. Oh my God, Jeremy, you jumped into me.
You lose points.
I realized because I've lost 2 now already.
I'm
Can we get out of here? Fucking lava! We picked this game type and we got lava. We're gonna be here forever.